I'm reading chapter 17 from my book. The chapter's called Gardens, and I'm reading part 2. And if you remember, I was looking for something I was good at so that I could get into a head teacher's garden. Mr. Bantam, our head teacher, let children go in if you'd done very well and if your teacher sent you to him. But I hadn't done anything good at all. And then my mum lost her ring, her engagement ring, and I thought that if I found it, I could go and tell my teacher and I would get into the garden for doing so well. But where was it? Then one day I had an idea. The magpies would have stolen it. They liked that sort of thing. Everybody knew. So I decided to climb the tree to where their nest was. Well, I can tell you, my heart was hammering and I got very frightened. But I soon calmed down and concentrated on my climbing. It was easy at first. I'd done it loads of times before, but our magpie's nest was right at the top where I hadn't been. And I had to balance on the tiny little thin branches, and they cracked and swayed as I climbed on. It was a good job I was a lightweight. I could hardly see their nest now because it was hidden by leaves bigger than my hand, but I knew it was there because in the winter you could see high up a big black ball. And then I heard magpies cackling, and all at once this huge witch's nest was blocking everything out. Now one final heave, and I was squinting into a muddy bowl full of big, mean, green eggs. I put one hand in, holding tight with the other. I felt the warm eggs, but there was no sudden feel of a cold gold ring, or sudden bright colours of diamonds and dreams come true. It had to be there. After all my effort, Mum's ring just had to be there. But it wasn't. No matter how many times I felt around, there was nothing but eggs and mud. I'd one last desperate feel, and then I heard the great cackle of a magpie as it shouted loudly at me for being at her nest, and I leant back and started sadly down there without my prize. Now there was going to be no running to Mum and saying, "I've found your ring," and no going to my teacher, and no being pleased with me so I could go to Mr. Bantam and go in his garden at last. But at least one good thing happened. I could put good at climbing on my what I am good at list, but it wouldn't get me into that garden. I had to keep trying, and surely there was something else I could do. And just then I had another idea in a flash. Maybe if I planted my seeds, my Virginia stock that Auntie Vera had given me, I could do well and get a bunch of flowers to take to my teacher. So I followed the instructions, and I raked some soil, and I got it into a very fine tilth. Then I tore the seed packet open, and I emptied the seeds into my hand. They were so tiny you couldn't believe they would grow into plants, but I had to try. I carefully let my seeds drizzle out of my hand and into my fine tilth in a row. And then I put 2 sticks to mark where they were, and then I covered them up with fine soil. I must say, I was very surprised how quickly they grew. I only had to wait a week, and they were up there shooting, and I was watering every day. They were growing so fast, I decided to measure them. I measured 1 inch, and then 2 inches, and then 3 inches. I just couldn't believe it. And then one day something happened. Very unlucky it was. And it wasn't our unlucky magpies that did it or brought that bad luck. It was the sparrows, the little silly brown sparrows. You see, they used my fine soil to make mud baths. And when I went to find my plants and water them one day after school, all that was left was straggly bits of dead leaves and stem and roots. I just stood there and shouted at them, "How could you? Oh no, how could you?" I would never now get a little bunch of flowers to take to my teacher, and then she would be pleased with me and let me go in the garden. "What's wrong?" That was our Katy, who had heard me shout and came bounding over. She looked at my poor plants and realised straight away. But then suddenly she pounced. "What's this?" she shrieked suddenly. "It's Mum's engagement ring. I found Mum's engagement ring," said Katy, and off she went to show it to Mum, and she was rubbing it on her dress so that she cleaned the mud off as she went. Oh, if only that was me. If only I'd looked down, I could have seen the ring, and I could have taken it to Mum, and she would have said, "Well done." And then I could have told Mr. Bantam, and he would have said, "Well done," and I would have got into the garden. I was very sad, but Mum was happy. For one thing, she'd got her engagement ring back, and soon it was cleaned and on her finger again, next to a wedding ring, and it seemed that it sparkled even more, and hundreds of colours and dreams shone out. And another reason for her to be happy was that she was going to Ringham Carnival, and she was going to be a flower lady on a float for the WI, with all her relatives and friends. And I was going in a competition too, a fancy dress competition. And I was going to be a flower girl like Mum, but I wouldn't be on the float. I would be walking behind as that lorry went round the village. Mum got my dress out that I'd used for the party when I went to Edmund's Hotel, and it was lovely. And she made me a little bonnet, and she put flowers round it, and I carried a basket, and she put flowers in those. They weren't from our garden, though, because our garden was just green with cabbages and gooseberries. She made the flowers out of lovely material, and this was a chance for me to do well and tell Mr. Bantam and get in the garden at last. When I had won, I would be so pleased, and my teacher, Miss McBride, would be so pleased with me as well, and there would be no question of it, but I would be so happy and go and sit on that seat and see all those lovely things. I didn't look up to see the magpies, just to be sure, though. They'd deserted their nest after I'd gone, and it serves them right for stealing those baby sparrows when they took them and they just hatched and they ate them up. I was never going to look at a magpie again. I stood very still in the line to be judged in my flower girl outfit. I was thinking of winning. I would surely win. I smiled at the judges as they looked seriously at us. I couldn't wait to hear the result.